although that has changed in the last 24 hours. Don't know if you knew that. Set the stage a bit about what it is we're trying to do and why it's a challenge and what you need to tweak a little bit. And then a solution that we see many clients using today. In fact, there's one amongst you, one of your peers is in the room, but also has done a lot of this and seen a lot of benefit from it. So we're going to walk through what some of those inputs are, what the results are, and what the ongoing benefit that is for you. And then, of course, the summary at the end and questions. If you have something that's really burning throughout, just feel free to ask. It's more fun to have this as a discussion than a lecture. Just to get to know a little bit, how many people are here representing an end user? A few? Okay, excellent. How many people are shy and don't want to put their hand up? See, nobody would have done that. It would have been lying. Anyways, how many people from an IT perspective? Okay, and how about an OT perspective? Awesome. Okay, great cross-section. Thank you. So, a little bit about myself. My name is Rick Kaun. I currently occupy the title of VP Solutions. What that means is I take my 22 years of having tried to build OT programs and challenges and overcome them globally from a number of different companies, including Honeywell, Matricon, Verve, and as of yesterday now about to be Rockwell as well, as we got acquired yesterday. So I try to bring lessons learned from places I've been, big, small. The cool thing is that everybody struggles with the same things, so you're not unique wherever you're at today. The benefit is that we can hopefully learn from their mistakes and accelerate our plan by capturing those. Verve as a company has been around actually for 30 years. We started as automation engineers, so everything that we're talking about today is built by an OT perspective for an OT environment specifically, not venture capital backed, not built in a research lab, actually built in spinning equipment environments and high consequence industrial complex. Wrong button. So, setting the stage. Business case usually includes things like a problem statement. Clearly defined problem statement. Who can tell me clearly what their biggest problem is or how big the problem is in OT for security? I walked into a plant manager once and we're going to do an assessment and he said, you're going to tell me I don't patch and I don't change passwords. How does that help me? Right? So it's a little bit bigger issue to make sure we get to the context, and we like to call it what does done look like? What are we trying to achieve? And we actually looked forward to what that looks like, not just in establishing a control, but in maintaining it as well. You have to come up with a proposed solution, and if we can't really clearly define the problem statement, then that becomes more difficult to say what we're going to do about it. And then, of course, we're asked, well, okay, so how much is it going to take? How long and how much money? And then how do I show that it was worth it? I was at a call with a client the other day. We started pitching what we're going to do next, and the CFO says to my guy, I gave you money for software last year. We're secure now, aren't we? What are we doing here? So there's some challenges that we need to overcome. So why is this hard for OT? Well, the problem statement, as I'd mentioned, can it be clearly defined? Do we know how big the problem is? Have we done an assessment? Is it conjecture? Do we think we have a certain number of assets? How many people know with definitive clarity how many assets they have? Everybody starts laughing as soon as I ask. You do, good, there's one. That's better than usual. Infinitely better than usual, unfortunately. We had a client that thought they had it figured out and they were wrong by 512%, right? So, and I'm not costing, it is a challenge, right? And if we don't know what we don't have, and if we don't know, here's the other thing, I have a raw number, how many of them are critical to safe operations? How many are redundant? How many are end of life? How many don't have support, right? When you start to unpack that a little bit, you get down the rabbit trail real quick of, I don't know what I don't know, right? So we're already trying to figure out how do we solve these things, right? Do we know what our priority is? I have it on their vuln list as non-contextual. I'm going to dig into that a little bit more in a minute. The proposed solution, how far do we go? What does done look like? The topic I just delved into a little bit is around inventory. If I were to ask each of you to submit a list of what should be on an inventory, I would get as many different answers as there are people in this room. What do I actually need if I'm eventually going to do business continuity and disaster recovery? I probably want IP and MAC address, et cetera, but I'm going to want an operational tag that tells me the impact of that asset, and should it go to the top of the list, or can it be considered redundant and dealt with as convenience presents itself? So there's other things we need to make sure we understand. What is it we're trying to achieve and how far are we trying to go? We cannot boil the ocean. For the cost and timing to deploy, the challenge here is it depends on the answers above. If I'm off by 510% and I'm not sure exactly how far I'm trying to go with this, we have some challenges. By the way, a non-OT standard but a empirical one is the CIS 18. they actually have notions of maturity within each of the disciplines. So your hardware inventory is an maturity of 1, 2, or 3, depending on how far you go. If you wanted to start to look at something like that, that would be a value if you're just sort of starting out. And then finally, results. How do we prove that what we did is right? One of my friends that works at a consulting company that runs around and sells services for people we talk that don't have enough bodies, they were going to configure and harden all the systems and all the refineries for them. And when they were done, they told the client they were done. The client said, great, how do I know? They said, well, log in and go check the registry settings. Like, you know, go. That's not sustainable, and it's not measurable, and it's certainly not enforceable, right? So there needs to be a way to quantify what we're doing. All right, so what's the solution? We recommend, we call it a tech-enabled assessment. I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the options are and why the pros and cons, and it's actually a combination of the two. But we recommend a three-pronged approach that will show thought leadership. You're looking towards the future, you're looking towards sustainability, you're looking towards practicality when you're presenting this. Use of empirical data and an eye towards life post-project or what the real cost will be. If you do not plan to maintain it and manage it, you are planning to fail. It's a stupid little thing to say. I know it's cheesy, but to be honest, if you don't staff whatever tool, anybody can buy technology. If you can't figure out how to get value from it sustainably and repeatedly over time, you're wasting everyone's time and money. For those of you taking pictures, I think it's because you want to see me, thank you. But all the slides will be available after as well, so you don't have to worry about it. So how do you do that? Data collection. We wholly advocate a multidimensional aggregated view of your data. Some of those notions I just talked about, not just an IP and a MAC address, but asset criticality and its physical location, its function and operations, et cetera. Second, a reasonable plan. Stages, deliverables, in scope. We can do low-hanging fruit today. We can do project-based stuff like network segmentation tomorrow, and we can get to the capital project on refresh down the road if we need to. You need to have that sort of a reasonable approach. Third, how do we measure if we've accomplished it or achieving it, right? We can't just move from one project to the next and assume it's happily ever after. The result is a plan to get started, identify early true gap, and plans then become much more accurate. Long-term commitment is minimized. So we are building a sustainable, cost-effective path forward. That's the intention. Quick time check. I only have 57 slides and I'm on 6, so I'm gonna speed up a little bit here. All right, data collection. Common options. Sorry, this has become a bit of an eye chart. You could pitch an assessment. A typical paper-based assessment, hire a Big Four, hire a consulting firm. They're going to come in and tell you what's wrong. Great, right? The challenge is it's a point in time. It's going to change maybe even instantly. The very next day a new release is out that there's a vulnerability while your data is already old, right? You guys do a new project to upgrade something, add new equipment, put a new piece of software, alarm management loop, tuning, whatever. It's out of date already. Okay? The other is that it's often put into a linear approach. Here's my gap analysis. I'm going to pick the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to do some projects. I'm going to go to market. I'm going to do some of that work, and I'm going to assess again next year. That can take 5 years, 6 years, depending how fast your organization goes, how many sites you have to do, and how much work needs to be done. Okay? You could instead use existing tools to provide insight. You got a vulnerability tool, right? Or a perimeter detection sort of thing. We get hit X number of times. That's a single measure. Look at this here. See this one? It's kind of small, but it's a really big number. For those of you at the back, it's 23,917. That's how many vulnerabilities we found in a midstream gas processor in Calgary, Alberta. That is a useless number. It's scary as hell, but it's useless. You're not going to start at the top. You're not going to get it to 0, so where do you start, right? So individual tools without context, not a lot of help. That's why we recommend the aggregated move. Here's where it really comes together and why it's impactful. Is anyone familiar with this diagram? You're a real diehard nerd reader if you are. This is the IC99, which is a precursor to IC 62443, because that's how you call it international, it's not just North American, has a working group, the patch working group. Sounds like a lot of fun, right? Writing engineering standards by committee. I can't think of anything more masochistic, but they came up with basically this process, and this is what we're up against every single day, right? We need to identify a vulnerability. I just showed you we found 23,000 of them at this other place. But does it affect ICS? If the answer is no, what do? We just go back to work, right? If it does, but there's a workaround, guess what? We go back to work, right? But if you really actually have to get into it, and this is where the business case comes from, right? Because you can't have 23,000 vulnerabilities forever. You need this sort of input to be able to do this function, which is analyze the risk, right? If we don't have assets impact, software running on it, backup status, whitelisting status, configuration status, we're guessing, right? So if you can pull all this data together, you have the ability to do something like this, which is where we're starting to change the game. Now, I'll walk through a little bit of this. But this is the single most powerful thing we're seeing come to this sort of discipline, okay? If you take the asset type and you build stuff that you can get operationally or metadata, and again, this is a bit of an eye chart, so we'll make sure we share this with everybody after the fact. But what is the impact of the system? What is its physical and logical location in the network? What is its impact to operations? Is there presence of critical programming equipment on there? What is this operationally? Not just on the wire from an IP or Mac or OS version, but what is this operationally? We then add to it criticality components like, let's map vulnerabilities to it, but let's also map exploits, okay? There's vulnerabilities out there that have active exploits in the wild. They got to go towards the top of that list of 23,000, okay? And then we can look at other components, like is it in layer 3 of the Purdue model and it's a network-based attack vector versus something in layer 2 or on a substation that's locked up in gates and guards up on the side of a mountain, right? The result is that we can actually take all these things and we can add points to something we don't like. And it becomes a really big number, like my golf game. And then we can have categories. We can have categories then that those empirical or those calculated scores fall into. And now we're not using conjecture or hyperbole or guesses. We have real empirical data from multiple indicators to say this is, according to my organization, a critical risk. And therefore has this level of response required for it. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. So, to refresh, multiple data sources for input mean a more robust and focused real risk. We call it your contextual risk or your residual risk. It allows the org to set a reasonable risk tolerance. Risk outside or above the tolerance becomes impetus to act. And focusing on the asset relative to operational impact and its other controls, et cetera, is how you really get to the proper risk and remove speculation and hyperbole. So we've got all the data, and I can measure it across multiple things. Remember, this approach lets us look at, well, I'll show you. Let me just show you what it looks like in the next slide. So once we've gathered the data, we want to then look at the data and analyze it against people, process, and technology. We can see systems running TeamViewer and therefore bypassing the network segmentation, right? So we've got a policy violation, we've got a configuration violation, we've got a remote access violation. You found 3 different things by that one presence of piece of software on a particular system. Right, so this drives the understanding and building your plan, your roadmap, and your business case, arguably underneath it, across people, process, and technology. We have a desired end game, how far does the org want to go and how fast, and we have a mechanism for maintenance when we look at the planning. We got to, again, set this up to be maintained. And the objective plan is to build scalable, sustainable, and prioritized risk reduction. Just checking time, so I want to make sure you get to the punchline. We're halfway through. What it can look like then is you can build this. Anybody recognize this? A little less obscure than the last reference. So this is actually the newest version of NIST, the NIST CSF. Version 2 includes a component for all your policies and procedures as well as your technical controls. This is effectively what you're trying to build, whether you do some of them today or not at all, or they could be improved, or your NERC-CIP power plant's been doing it for 10 years and it's time to refresh the tools and re-examine. The idea is that over time, we need to be able to build all of this. And if this isn't in our business plan, we're probably not going to get buy-in from management to build and embark upon this program. Going a step further, this is the sort of thing we can find when we take this approach relative to that template I just showed you. If what I just showed you on the previous slide is what we're striving for, and I have that technical data I told you we're going to collect at the first step, this is now the cross-reference between those two, okay? We can find policy and procedure violations like I just suggested. We can find network architecture challenges, access control, and endpoint specifically to the risk. So an article just yesterday, 90% of the risk comes through IT onto OS-based systems in the OT side, right? So now we're building a very robust, multidiscipline, multi-phased approach, which then we can present into a corporate view because we have the data, and now we want to figure out what order are we doing these things in? Who works at a multi-site environment? A lot of people. We all know which one is the crown jewels, right? We all know which one has the most cantankerous employees, will be the most difficult to get into. We have the ones that are forward-thinking, right? We have the ones that rely on the vendors. We know all these things. People are laughing back there. Those all need to come into this planning. We have one client that has internally what they call consequence ratings. They build stuff that can blow up. And so those ones have a different level of touch point than the ones that can just dissipate back into the air. We have others that may be archaic but make the most money, so nobody touches anything there, right? And these need to be incorporated into your plan as well. Again, back to that thought leadership component I said earlier, you're showing when you're presenting the business case, you get the different nuances and impacts, because this plan will have to go up the chain to different people that get measured on different things, right? We can't just go in and say, we got 23,000 vulnerabilities, I'm gonna buy a patch tool. You can then come up with an actual roadmap. This is what the business plan starts to look like, okay? Level 1, low-hanging fruit. We can remove TeamViewer. We can disable. One of my lovely friends in the refining and the oil sands in Canada, when they turned this on, they found 47 departed employees still had admin accounts on their critical control systems. That's a big deal. So they got rid of 47 admin accounts in the very first stage, like as soon as this was in there. So it's an immediate low-hanging fruit sort of grab that you want to get on. The next stage usually is that middle one, like I told you about, where we're going to redesign some things that are project-based. It can take a little bit more time and money, network segmentation, a secure remote access program, refresh our backup and restoration plans so that we have central sort of offsite storage, et cetera. And then longer term, we have many clients that want to start doing logging, but they still have old systems that don't support syslog, for example. So some capital refresh type of things. And again, across your people, process, and technology, we're showing that we're building an entire program, not just buying technology to solve a particular symptom. So where does it take us from there? So refresh, there's three prongs. This is the second prong. We're building a business case or program proposal. This is a program, not a project. The plan is essential. It must be practical, has to address real risk that is outside of the organization's risk tolerance. The deployment and improvement of the program must be scaled to allow for time, resources, and other practical considerations. And this approach allows you to present a scalable, sustainable, practical approach to improvement. The linear approach I told you about earlier, just by way of comparison, one of our clients did this measure as opposed to the traditional one, and they are already at the 20-month mark of a 5-year program at 9 months. So more than twice as fast as they'd anticipated. Some of the next stages where they're doing capital projects will take some time, but they've accelerated the maturity a lot faster by taking this sort of approach. And by the way, the tech, once it's deployed, not only shows you what your gap is today, but removing those admin accounts comes off of the admin dashboard, and so you can start to see progress as well. And I'm going to show a few of those in a minute here. So the maintenance portion. How many people have an unlimited ability to hire as many people as they can find to do this? Okay, let's ask the more practical question. How many people can't hire for the job opening they already do have approved because they can't find somebody? Yeah, exactly. So what we need to do is we need to build a long-term sustainable approach. And this is where I think this becomes really, really cool. So the way that this technical-based approach works is once you gather all that data, you can automate that data gathering and you can bring it up into a central dashboard. This central dashboard allows you to leverage a very small set of IT and OT practitioners or risk management or whatever you want. And as an organization, you can start to assess and plan to remediate risk or prioritize it once and share it multiple times. So we're not saying, here's an email to 52 manufacturing sites worldwide with blue key, do what you can do and let me know when you're done. We say, here's what's happening, here's the order it's going in, and we can even automate some of that. That same 52 site reference I just gave did this and saved 70% of their engineering hours by using this automated approach. So if this is your Outlook calendar Monday morning and this is Friday afternoon, your engineers are back to being engineers by midday Tuesday as opposed to working all week. That's a significant consideration. And again, you want to show your boss you got this figured out and you're not going to need an army. Management is a huge, huge component. Am I getting the 10-minute mark? There we are.
You have a very uniform set of sites, right? And that's not necessarily true when you have acquisitions and things like that.
No, not at all. Most of our clients are 50, 60 years old with multiple OEM systems. So for example, I'll give you a quick example. So we had a client, power client, traditional coal-fired generation, built in the 70s and 80s. They're very complex environments. They had a mandate from corporate to get rid of Kaspersky. They didn't want foreign-built antivirus in their North American assets. They saw on the dashboard there were 146 copies of that software. They sent a request to the technology to uninstall it, but they set a flag because this is an operational environment. We don't want a big brother push anything in there. each of the sites, because we gathered the data of the asset's criticality, its physical location, where it was, and et cetera, they could follow their own change control, phone the operator in the control room, do the controlled uninstall on their terms. All 6 sites could do it in parallel. The entire exercise took less than 2 hours. Most traditional coal-fired acquisition-based complex environments would take 2 months. Good question, though. Thank you. Yes, sir.
How long does the actual initial data collection take? What's the time frame?
So once the tech is deployed, it is instantaneous. You can update it as frequently as you like. The deployment can be as slow or as fast as you like. So we had a client did some testing to make sure everybody was happy at the difficult site, the happy site, the complex site, the new site. And then once they had it set up, we deployed 52 sites in 14 weeks. So that CISO had all 52 sites worldwide in 1 quarter on his dashboard to see. Anyways, so what does it look like? Measure and maintain. Here's how we want to show. Look, what if I actually could give you all of your vendors by subclass of equipment, which is very helpful for end-of-life management? What if I showed you user-defined tags for asset criticality? What if we showed you a calculation, a calculated residual score, all in one dashboard? This is now driving empirical, data-driven, logical discussions as opposed to hyperbole, conjecture, panic, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We then start to layer vulnerability data. And what if we could show you, I have criticality rankings from the plant, and I have criticality rankings from the vulnerability database, and where critical meets critical, I want to zero in. We get that 23,000 down to a couple hundred. Or if I just want to show over time, look, this must have been a patch Tuesday, and then we started working on it. And it looks like as an organization, we're roughly this mid-range here. Is that acceptable, or do we want to get better or worse? This is, again, I need more staff, and here's the proof to show you. Maybe for patching, we want to, configuration. Least privilege, remember the example I gave earlier about not knowing what the consulting team did because there was no way to report it? Well, what about if we instantly measured against Department of Defense Layer 1 standards for hardening of OS and networking gear? There's your job for your summer intern, run around and rename all the guest accounts or disable them, right? Or rename the administrator account, the basic building blocks that reduce your attack surface. Or maybe we want to look at patching. Look, the 2 patches here take up 15% of my total CVEs in this organization. This is probably the 2 patches I want to work on first. Or maybe I just want to filter by vendor-approved subsets, right? If I could show that ABB approved these patches and they're still not at a particular site, what's that site's excuse anymore? We're changing the game, and we're showing the boss when we're doing this, look, I know how to do this and where to spend the time and the money. It's not going to be too much money, not too much effort, exactly what we want and well within corporate standards. Probably getting close to the 5-minute mark, so I just want to point out, I've already touched upon this stat. This is the long-term vision, I think, of where this is going to get to and what you want to present to your management to show you how you're going to build it and then maintain it. And it does incorporate multiple perspectives. Again, you will be presenting to multiple people who have different perspectives. The CISO wants to report to the board. The CFO wants to know what they're getting out of it, right? The plants want to know how they're involved, right? So you need to have all these different aspects when you're putting them into, and this data-driven starting point allows you to pivot into all those different angles. Well, don't want to believe me, believe this client. They presented this publicly a couple of years ago. They were a power client, NERCSIP, and that's why some of the marks in blue are a little bit high, like around admin and awareness. You can't go to any North American power plant and not see signs about don't hold the door open, don't share your passwords. But kind of low on the pure security stuff. And once they deployed this technology, they reassessed themselves against the NIST standard. And the orange are the improvements they made systemically. And if you go to your boss and say, look, I can build you a absolutely what we need with a sustainable model without an army, and we will improve across the board, you've now made a very compelling argument. So, summary. Tech-enabled assessment provides significant benefits: contextual risk, a right-sized approach, ability to begin remediation right away, creation of long-term staged approach, management, maintenance, and reporting, an accelerated cyber maturity journey, and maximum ROI with minimal headcount and footprint. With 5 minutes left, if there were any other questions or clarifications, I'd be happy to take them. Or if you'd rather speak more directly, we are just outside here at the first booth on the way to the coffee station, and we're here for most of the week. So.